Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to episode 700 of the Property Podcast. Yes, this is our 700th episode. So how are we going to celebrate? Are we going to talk about ourselves for 30 minutes? We'd love to, but we know you won't listen, so we're going to give us something far more valuable. We have taken what we believe are the 7 laws of property investment from the last 700 episodes. Each and every one of these laws is not optional. If you fail to do one, you will fail in property investment. But we're going to deliver it to you. You can save it and refer back to it. It's going to be one of those episodes.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. Thank you for joining us. In case you don't know, we run a business that arranges more than £100 million worth of property deals for our clients every year. You can find out about that at propertyhub.net/invest. And as a result of having been doing that for 13, 14 years, long time, and publishing 700 episodes of this podcast, we have identified the absolute keys. We have distilled everything you need to know to succeed in property down to just 7 laws. And we're going to share all of those with you in just a moment.
It's time for our news story of the week. And this week, we keep you updated on all things Renters' Rights Act because we have a special milestone. We've done 100 days, Rob, but there's been an interesting news story this week about pets. I know this has not become the wildlife podcast, I can assure you. Pets when it comes to your tenants wanting pets in their properties.
Yes, and one of the things that landlords were worried about before renters' rights came into effect was that suddenly your property would be teeming with cats, dogs, hamsters, and goodness knows what else. There wouldn't be a damn thing you could do about it because if tenants would have the right to request a pet, and the presumption is that you would say yes, you would need a defensible reason to say no. So far, that appears not to have been the case. According to this survey, 93% of landlords have had no formal pet request since the Renters' Rights Act came in about 100 days ago. And I suspect that a part of that is like, yep, the hype was overdone and people were exaggerating what the effect could be. But also, I think a big part of it is just lack of awareness. The last survey I saw, well over half of tenants had not even heard of the Renters' Rights Act, had no idea what it meant or what it allowed them to do and what had changed. So it's entirely possible that as the months and the years roll on and the knowledge of how tenancies now work become more widespread, you might start to see more requests. But Rob, something else that has happened, as reported by The Telegraph, is that rents seem to have increased. And this isn't necessarily, all the landlords are quitting, it's pushing up rents forever type story, but it's to do with the fact that you now can't accept any bids above the asking rent. So a natural move is to increase the asking rent and be willing to accept something below it. And one agency Rob quoted in this story says that there's been a 36% year-on-year increase in landlords increasing their initial rents, some pitching 5 to 10% above what they actually expect to achieve. So it's interesting. Previously, you've had a rent, you'd normally get round about what you asked for. Sometimes you even get a bit more. But now we've got almost an offers up to kind of system.
And this is one of the most notable things to come out the first 100 days of the Renters' Rights Act. Yes, it's been 100 days. And that, what you said there, Rob, doesn't surprise me. You know, if you give it a little bit of thought when you lay out, okay, here's the new rules, what could happen, what has happened isn't surprising. Is it good for tenants? It can be debated either way, I guess, because you could say, well, at least they're not getting into bidding wars anymore. But now there's lots of properties out there that may never have got into a bidding war and are going to be listed at higher prices than before. It seems that it's certainly sharpened the senses of landlords in the market and what they're pricing those homes at. And that's not it. There's quite a bit that's happened in the first 100 days. It's not been the doomsday scenario for landlords that many people expected. And we covered this in great detail in Property Pulse last Friday. So all Property Pulse readers, if you haven't read that yet, please do. Although we can see by the open rates, the vast majority of you open it very, very quickly, which is very pleasing to see. And a quick note, if you've not signed up for Property Pulse yet and you're listening to this podcast, we'll just put it down to a moment of badness that can be addressed right now. Go to propertyhub.net/pulse. Go on, propertyhub.net/pulse. Pop your email in and get the best weekly newsletter delivered to your inbox each and every Friday, where we go deep on these topics and you can learn so much more. So go and do that now.
Can you believe it is episode 700 of the Property Podcast? So today we're talking about 700 things you must understand about property. No, we're not. That would be overkill. We're going to talk about seven laws of property. If you were to take just 7 things from all of the previous 700 episodes, more than a decade that we've been doing this podcast, what should they be?
I'd like to think, Rob, we've delivered more than 7 things of value, but in all those episodes, but these are true laws, right? These are the things that have stood the test of time, that haven't changed in all those episodes, that everybody needs to put front and center of their mind when they invest. And I think when we go through this list, some people will be all over some of them, but perhaps forgotten about others. I know, for example, the 7th one won't be something that people are doing automatically. And even in the first one, which we're about to touch on, how powerful that is, even though we go on about it all the time. So let's start cracking through this list.
Well, and this first one is something that I'd say we've become more and more strident about as time has gone on. It's something that we have talked about since the very first episode. But over the years, we have not relaxed on this. We have got more and more determined that law 1 is you must use leverage. That's something we never used to say quite in that kind of way, Rob. It was, oh yeah, leverage is really good and here's why it's powerful. But now we're saying, no. If you don't use leverage, it's just not worth it.
It is not worth it. Why would you consider property without leverage? Well, let's look at it. Let's not just go, Rob and Rob say it. Let's look at it. What's the return that you can get on property right now? Well, actually, it's not too bad. Gross yields are 6-7%. Your net yield might be 4 or 5. That's competitive with a bank, right? It's probably a little bit more than you would get in the bank. A few years ago, though, the returns you would get from property were less than what you get in a bank. So at different points in time, you'd get more from a bank. Right now, property would give you slightly more. But leaving money in a bank is no effort. Creating, building, running a property portfolio, even if it's one property, is a lot more work than leaving money in the bank. So for that slight increase you can get right now, it's just not worth it for the effort. It is not worth it. Property investment without leverage is not worth it. But with leverage, it's spectacular. With leverage, it's a no-brainer. And let's give you an example. Let's say you had a property and you buy it for 100,000. Not many properties these days you can buy for that, but it's just simple numbers. So you spend the 100,000, you put your savings in, and that's the property you get. And I know some people will be going, what about costs? Yes, they exist, but let's just keep this really simple. So that's option A. Option B is using that £100,000 and using it as a deposit and then buying 400,000 pound properties, or one property worth 400,000 because you're putting 100,000 down and that's 25% deposit. And then you're able to get 75% of the money from the bank. That's leverage. A mortgage is leverage. That's what we mean by that. So that means you've got a portfolio worth 400,000. Again, there are costs, but let's keep it simple. So if you don't leverage, it's 100,000. If you do leverage, it's 400. Now, a small number of you may be thinking, well, I'll get more rent on the 100,000 because I've got no mortgage. And yes, that is true. You will make a little bit more that way. Although even with the mortgages on the 400,000, you're still making a profit. So that leverage is being paid by someone else. Now, let's fast forward into the future. When the property market has gone up by 25%, which will happen at some point, whether it's 5, 10 years down the line, doesn't matter. That 100,000 portfolio is now worth 125,000. Marvellous. You've made 25,000 and you've earned a rental return. Great. But if you've leveraged, that £400,000 portfolio is now worth £500,000. So you've had an increase of £100,000. Your portfolio has gone up by 25% as well, but because the number you start with is bigger, the number you get is bigger. And that's £100,000. So you've made 25,000 versus 100,000 in capital uplift, and you started with the same amount of money. 25,000 versus 100,000. That's massive. That's a big, big difference. And that is why you must leverage, because like we keep saying, Rob, it's just not worth it if you don't.
No, I find property interesting. I've been interested enough to podcast about it for more than 10 years. But if I can make the same money with no hassle and no risk in the bank, or with no hassle and less risk in the stock market, well, I'd do that. But as you've said, Rob, leverage completely changes the game, as it would, because you can buy 3 or 4 times more of it by using someone else's money. So the returns you end up making are just not even close. And as part of it, I think it's worth giving a quick shout out to inflation.
Oh, good old mate, inflation.
You've got to do it. You've got to do it because you're assuming property prices are going to go up. Yeah, you are assuming property prices are going to go up, but not because property always gets more expensive and is getting less and less affordable. It's actually got more affordable over the recent years. But property will, over the long term, always go up because everything always goes up because of inflation. And we won't go off on a big one about it now, but something we've talked about extensively in the past and something that I've talked about in my book, The Price of Money, is that you have to have inflation. Governments must have inflation. There is no version of a functioning world from where we're starting today where you don't have inflation. They will do whatever they need to make it happen. And we could look at another really quick example to show just how powerful it is. So let's assume you have inflation running at just 2%, which is what it's supposed to be. It's almost always higher. But even if it is just at that 2% target and property just goes up in line with it, it doesn't do anything special at all, then if you put in a £50,000 deposit on a £200,000 property, you have doubled your money in 10 years. Just with 2% inflation, nothing more, property not doing anything above that, not buying in a good area, not adding any value, and not even counting the rent that you receive for the whole of that 10 years. That is, for me, Rob, the purest example of the power of using leverage and, as part of that, taking advantage of inflation. But of course, I'm talking about 10 years. It is a long process, and that links into law number 2.
The second law, and for us, it absolutely is a law. You've got to be in property for the long term because you just don't know what's going to happen. The last few years have been a prime example of that. The market's been flat in real terms. With inflation, you could say it's actually fallen. Yes, rents have gone up, so there's been upside there. And right now, buying is amazing in terms of the opportunities. But holding during the last few years hasn't been spectacular. But if you then go back 10 years, even though it's been one of the worst decades for property, we've still seen growth. We've still seen really good returns if you've leveraged. And the longer you go back, 20, it gets better again. 30, spectacular. Like, the longer you go, the better it gets. So even if you have a bad decade, and I think a decade or more is classed as long term, you'll still do incredibly well from property investment, incredibly well. But you have to go in for the long term, because if you're approaching property as a quick win game, you're probably going to fail. Now, is it possible? Can you win quick in property? Yes, you can, but you need a lot of skill and a lot of luck and a lot of experience as well to know what you're doing. And some people will try and tell you that they can sell you that experience, but you don't have the skill still, that sharing that experience won't be enough, and you still will need a tremendous amount of luck. Rob and I have been investing for a long, long time, longer than the 700 episodes that we've done. And have we been able to win quick at property in that period? No. And I'd like to think we know what we're doing. Have we made mistakes? Loads of them. That's the experience part. But the point I'm making is, overall, we've done very, very well, even with mistakes within our portfolios, because we've given it time. Time in property helps eradicate those mistakes. Time may change your view on an investment you made. You may be a year into a buy-to-let you've purchased and be thinking, oh, it's not the best, it hasn't done as well as I'd hoped. Don't judge it after a year, judge it after 10. Time in property is so important. Whatever your strategy, the only one it doesn't work for is flips. But flips in the short term are super, super risky, particularly in this market. Incredibly hard to execute in this market. But if you play the long game, if you go long term, the chances are you will be very successful in property.
You mentioned something in there which I think is really important, which is that because it's a long-term game, that you really must not judge in the short term, and you must not extrapolate from your first year in property, because your first year in property will be the worst. I think it's something that's really hard for people mentally, because getting into property in the first place is hard. So to get to the point of being a property investor, you have saved up a substantial amount of money. You've gone through, hopefully, a substantial amount of research and work and thought, and you finally get to this rarefied position that not many people ever achieve of being a property investor. And having gone through all that, 6 months, a year in, your life is probably no better, possibly slightly worse, because now you've got something else to manage. Hopefully it's not much, but there's something else you need to keep an eye on. You've got something else that letters keep coming through your door about, and you haven't had any growth that you can measure yet. And there's a strong chance that your property has actually disappointed you a little bit. You may not have achieved the rent that you thought you would to start with, because the first year, the first rent is often the most tricky. You may have had expenses that you weren't expecting. Because again, when you rent out a property for the first time, there's probably things that you just hadn't thought about or that you weren't aware of when you bought. All of this has already bitten you and you haven't had the upside yet. So that's why this is such an important second law to be aware of, because you need to realize, okay, this is normal. That's okay. I haven't done anything wrong. And basically withhold judgment completely for as long as you possibly can. If you can go 5 years without even thinking about it, fantastic. Because then when you have a look, you go, oh, wow, great. Look at what this has done. Look at how my equity has grown. Look at how much rental income is in the bank. Oh, I could actually pull some equity out and buy another one now. That is really the only sane way to think about property. And Rob, that links into law number 3, which is really what keeps you in the game for all this time, which is that every property must pay you to hold it. And I think, Rob, there are 2 things you have to hold in mind at the same time here, being that rental income alone will not make you wealthy. But at the same time, you very much must have rental profit. And if that sounds like it's in conflict, then it really shouldn't.
No. And the great thing about this law is it's easy to enact in this current market because the yields are so good. It's really hard to find a property that doesn't pay for itself and give you money in your pocket each and every month. There's so many reasons for doing it because 1, why would you do it if you're not getting a return? 2, there's always going to be things that go wrong that need paying for, and building up a surplus is absolutely worthwhile. And I'd say third as well, it can help build that portfolio or finance a lifestyle that you're after. It depends. What you do with those funds can be deployed in different ways, but they should be deployed. You know, that's the thing. Once you've got that reserve pot to cover expenses, then you should be deploying that money one way or another, whether it's financing your lifestyle or building your portfolio further. But this is a law, and the reason we bring it and make sure it's etched in your brains for when this happens, because I've seen it happen before, that when the property market booms, people start to buy for growth. And it's very, very tempting. And perhaps maybe everyone who's listening to this podcast isn't in that place, because if you're interested now when sentiment is low and if property's not sexy, then you get it, right? You truly get what property investment's about. But a lot of people will come to the market when the property market starts booming. It's going to be marvelous for our download numbers. But what will happen is some of those people will start buying for growth, because you'll be making tremendous returns through growth when capital growth is kicking on. They're the people who will lose, and they're the people who'll be exits in the market, and they're the people you'll be buying from when they're selling at a reduced price, or maybe they've been repossessed altogether. Not nice, but it will happen. So it's an important law, a law that I think all our podcast listeners will be absolutely adhering to, but just keep it in mind. Don't follow that herd when it happens, because it will happen again at some point.
Okay, law number 4, and this is something that we have spoken about from the very beginning of the podcast, which is fundamentals. Fundamentals drive everything. What do we mean when we say fundamentals? We mean the things that people care about, which is employment, transport links, and leisure. You want somewhere where it's nice to live, where there are things to do, where there are jobs, and where you can get to those jobs. It really is pretty simple. So if you want a good investment, buy where the fundamentals are good. And even better, buy where the fundamentals are improving. So that's why regeneration is such a strong signal. So take Manchester as your classic example of this. Manchester city centre has undergone absolutely massive regeneration. As a result, that's pulled in employers. Loads of big employers relocated to Manchester. Therefore, lots of people want to move to Manchester or stay in Manchester after they've been studying, whereas previously they wouldn't have done. And of course, that pushes up rents and it pushes up property prices. And it improves the leisure offering, because suddenly there's a critical mass of people to support the coffee shops, the gyms, the whatever else it is that you want. And I think, Rob, this is one of the observations that's allowed us to be very accurate with the predictions that we've made at the start of every year about which cities, which areas are going to grow the fastest. Because if you've got an area where the fundamentals are good and improving, and yet prices are relatively low, affordability is good, well, then of course property prices are going to go up.
They are. I think if you were going to play the property podcast bingo for the words that we use the most on the podcast, fundamentals would absolutely be on there. And for good reason. Without fundamentals, you just will fail. People will be attracted to properties that seem like a really good deal. But the reason they are a good deal is because it's lacking in the fundamentals. You know, you might be able to get a great yield in certain parts of the country, incredible returns, but the capital growth won't follow because of the fundamentals. And capital growth is the game, as we've talked about already. like capital growth, holding for the long term and reaping those rewards is huge. If you're buying the average area in the UK, you will do quite well. But for every average area, there's an above average area and a below average area. And it's actually super simple to pick the above average areas. You look at areas with brilliant fundamentals, but the yields are really good as well. And when the two combine, then you're like, wait a minute, this is value. And there's value here, so therefore the capital growth will come at some point. Might not be year 1 or 2, but eventually it will come because the value here is insane for the amount of fundamentals in place. And that's one of the ways you can pick areas that do above average. But if your portfolio is full of above average, the returns that you make versus the average investor are huge and exaggerated even further against the people who buy in the below average areas.
So everything we've talked about so far sounds pretty easy. We've just talked about how relatively simple it is to find a strong investment area and find somewhere that's going to outperform the average. Then we said that all you've got to do is hold on to it for a long time and you'll end up doing really well just because of the effect of inflation and the use of leverage. So why do people so often find it so hard? Well, it's because they're not obeying rule number 5, which is follow the data and ignore the noise. And for me, this is absolutely critical because what you need to realize is that most people's common sense and the general prevailing vibe will lead you the wrong way all the time. When everyone's feeling great about property, we saw it post-COVID in about 2021. We saw it in the run-up to the financial crisis in 2006, 2007. When everyone's feeling really good about property, it's not because they suddenly have a deep appreciation for the rules we've just been through. No, it's because they're getting carried away and they're speculating and it's not going to end well. So if you follow the hype at that point, all right. If you followed some of the other rules and you're doing it for the long term, and you'll probably be all right at the end, but it's going to be uncomfortable and you might end up going backwards for a while. But right now we're in the opposite position for that. Everyone is super negative about property. No one, it seems, has the slightest bit of interest. And again, that leads you completely the wrong way because you can switch off to property just when the numbers are at their best. And there are way more opportunities around that are easier for you to access. So if you completely ignore what your friends are saying and what the headlines are saying, and you're just plugged into a few pretty simple pieces of data about what's happening with supply and wages and transactions and rental demand, then you will end up making far better decisions and getting far better results. But of all of these, Rob, I think this is probably the hardest law to follow because fundamentally in human psychology, when it comes to investing, people want to follow the crowd. People only want to buy something when the price is going up and everyone else wants it. That applies in property, it applies to the stock market, it applies to Bitcoin, it applies to anything you can imagine. So it's an extremely difficult mindset to break out of, but very profitable if you can.
Super profitable if you can. And once you break out of it, it's empowering because the results are quick to see. You get a great deal. That's the result of this type of market. You assess the market value, and through effort, you can get yourself an incredible deal. I directly apply this strategy to shares as well. The only time I buy is when I feel there's been some negative sentiment around a particular stock or sector that seems irrational to the fundamentals of play. That's when I will go in, not when Tesla's at a 7 million times multiple or wherever it's at. Like, that's not what you do. And logically, it all makes sense, but emotionally, it's super hard to do. But what will help you and keep you on the right path is the 6th law, which is having goals and then second, a strategy. Knowing what you want, why you're doing this, and getting laser clear on that is ridiculously powerful. Yet, so many people do not do it. I think most people, if asked, would say, I've got a goal. Think about yourself right now. Do you have a goal in property? You've got a yes, but is it a good goal? Is it a goal that is very easy to understand that whether you've succeeded or not? And if the goal doesn't have numbers attached, the answer is no, you don't have a good goal. You need to be able to say, from my property portfolio, I want it to do this thing. And the thing being the number, whether it's an income amount, an equity amount, the number doesn't matter too much, but having the number is critical. And then once you've got that number, you can then build that strategy. You can't do it the other way around. You have to have the number first. And then you build that strategy out. And the great thing is once you've got the number and then a bit of self-awareness around your life, what's possible, your skills, your starting place in terms of budget, then that strategy starts to form itself anyway. And the path forward is the strategy. And when the market noise is extremely positive, extremely negative, or somewhere in between. It doesn't matter because you've locked onto that goal, you've got your strategy, you're following it day in, day out, month in, month out, year in, year out. And sometimes you need to tweak the strategy. Rob and I have both done that over the years and we've documented it as well. But the point is, you'll make far better decisions and be less emotional when making those decisions if you have your goal and you have your strategy.
Okay, there is one more law. And this is probably what's made the biggest change for me since we started the podcast all those years ago, which is act like the CEO. Because this is something that most people don't do, and I very much did not do. The default when you get into property is to just do everything yourself. You're not just making an investment, you're also buying yourself a pretty annoying, stressful, low-paid part-time job, and one where the hours are completely unpredictable. You have no idea when you're suddenly going to have to leap into action and sort something out. It's probably going to be when you're on holiday, that washing machine's going to break, or a tenant's going to give notice, or something is going to happen. And when I started, I was absolutely no different, because it's what property is like. It goes with the territory. But as time has gone on, I've realised it doesn't have to be that way. And in fact, it shouldn't be that way. I'm not saying you can't be hands-on if you've got special skills. So if you are amazing at refurbs, then fair enough. That's an advantage you should be using. If you're an architect and you can add value to properties in a way no one else can, great, do that. But putting that aside, taking the case of just renting out a property and collecting the income for the long term, then you really should only be doing three things. You should be setting the strategy, setting the goal, like we just talked about. You should be pulling in the cash that allows you to build your portfolio. And that'll be from your job, or whatever it is that you do now that brings in the money that allowed you to invest in the first place. Keep doing that and build the team that does the rest. And after I finally realised that is an option at all, and that's what you should be doing, I've ended up in a position now where my portfolio is a lot bigger than it was when we started the podcast, and I'm spending way less time on it. I'm spending less than an hour a month on my portfolio because I've put a few simple things in place that allows me to keep the focus in just those three areas. And I think, Rob, it's not just me. I think the way that property has gone over the years, more and more people are coming into property as an investment, thinking more consciously about this kind of thing. But this is still a lesson that I want everyone to take to heart. Because if property is a hassle and you're spending all your time running around doing random £20 an hour kind of jobs, then you're not going to stay in it for the years. You're not going to grow your portfolio as far or as fast as you could. And you're not going to get all those benefits that we've talked about.
Absolutely, Rob. You need those systems and you need to outsource. And you can feel guilt when you do that because you feel like you should be doing that role, but it's not efficient. And you're not serving yourself or your goals when you do that.
So those are the 7 laws, and they're not laws that we've just come up with on the hoof. They're laws that we have developed over 700 episodes of this podcast. And this is what you get when you really do distill everything down to its essence. If you do these 7 things, even if you get a whole bunch of other stuff wrong, then you're probably going to do really well. If you do a whole load of other stuff really well, but you ignore just one of these, then you're probably going to be disappointed. So what I would encourage you to do is do an audit. Audit your own property business, your own property strategy against these 7 laws. Which are you currently not investing in accordance with? I'd say one that almost everyone could learn something from is number 7, act like a CEO. There's probably something you can do to take a job off your plate and spend more time on what you should really be doing that does make a difference to your property business. But there may be other things as well. Maybe you're being held back at the moment by all the negative noise. Maybe you're investing wherever it's convenient, not wherever the fundamentals are pointing you. Or maybe you're fearful of leverage, or you haven't fully understood the benefits, so your money could be working hard there. My advice is don't just take the last 20, 25 minutes as entertainment, but spend a bit of time thinking, how am I stacking up against each of these laws? Where could I make a change? Where could I make an improvement? Because these are the most important things. And therefore, if you can improve just slightly at just one of these, it can make an enormous difference to your portfolio. So Rob, that's a lot. That is a lot of distilled knowledge. That's a serious but potentially very impactful bit of homework. I hope you've got something a bit lighter for us for Hub Extra.
Maybe. It can be lighter, or you can be inspired and feel like you want to take on the world afterwards. What am I referring to? Well, it's a documentary, and I need to thank a lot of people, so I won't name anyone individually, but I know a lot of people have recommended this to me. If you're listening, thank you. I had to watch it just because just so many people said, Rob, this is the type of thing I think you would enjoy. And they were absolutely right. The documentary on Netflix is called Rafa, and it's about Rafa Nadal. And you don't need to be a tennis fan. I'm a casual tennis fan. I might watch a bit of Wimbledon. I don't really watch any of the other Grand Slams. but I've got appreciation for the sport. And this documentary is so well put together. It is not surface level. It really gets under the skin of Rafa Nadal and what it takes to be elite in your chosen discipline. And I truly mean elite. This man was elite at what he did. For many years, he was the best in the world. For many years, he battled with some of the greatest players of a generation in their chosen sport. The mindset, the dedication, the grit, the determination, the setbacks after setbacks. It's not just success. It's so many setbacks that he had to work through and go through. The complexities of his personality and the type of person he has to be to perform at this level, the childhood he had. Honestly, this stuff is inspiring. And I love this type of stuff. It's like when you get a great book and you get to truly understand what it takes to be a high performance individual. And so much out there now is surface level. It's glossed PR, but this isn't. It really isn't. It shows him for all his greatness and all his flaws. And the first episode, if you listen to this, is okay. I don't want you to go into this and watch the first episode and go, why was he so passionate about this? Get to the second episode and then you'll thank me. It's just beautifully put together. I've been inspired by this. I love it when there's something raw and true about an individual who's performed at the very best, and you can learn from that person. You don't have to copy them, but you can learn, you can be inspired. I absolutely was inspired. Absolutely loved it.
Oof, well, you got me inspired now. Thank you. I'll go and check that out. I do not have much interest in tennis, so I probably would have passed that by. So I'm glad you recommended it. And it reminds me of the Andre Agassi autobiography, Open, which both of us read and loved many years ago. Again, even if you're not a tennis fan, just such an interesting look into the psychology and the challenges and what it takes to be at the very top of such a competitive field. Well, that is us done for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you found it useful. Hope you go away and do something with it. And we'll be back next week to do it again. Episode 701. We will see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.